Hey guys, welcome back to CMTEQ channel in the C++ programming snippet. So in the previous tutorial, we basically talked about one of the easiest way to use an array as a function parameter. And to make things easier, we took an example of a CAN bus where we can basically scan the CAN bus to get some variables such as battery and engine temperature, as we can see. And we created this function here that basically takes the array and the size of the array, which were defined here in the main, and we computed the data, then we're able to return the computed value. But now the only issue with this function is because it's of type integer, so we can only return a single variable, an integer. So we cannot return all these variables here, the volt and engine and all of that. So in order to achieve that, we need to turn this function into an array function that can return all of these variables at once, and we can process them here and take actions. So if you want to get in line to what we did last time, please watch the previous tutorial and come back to this one. So without wasting any further time, let's go ahead and create a structure variable. So a struct is basically a data type used to basically group all sort of variables together. So we've got the volt and engine temperature and all of that. So we're going to group them together under a single variable. So let's call the keyword struct, and then we're going to choose a name for it. So we're going to say CAN bus. Okay. And in here, we can then place all the variables that we want to be under this struct variable. So we're going to basically use the volt. Okay, then we need to give a data type for our variable. So let's make things easier and then just use an integer data type for all of them. Now, since we've got now the struct defined, which is holding all of these variable, we can then go ahead change this function to take the data type to be of the struct type. So we're going to copy the CAN bus here and change the data type from int into a struct. Now, to make this function return an array, so we need to make it a function pointer. So we're going to include the pointer symbol into our struct variable. Right now, when we come to the return here, we can see that we've got a problem here. So return value type does not match the function type. Obviously, this was an integer. You can see we are returning an integer, but now the function type have changed to an array. So now to fix this, we need to create an array variable that we can actually return. So we're going to create a dynamically allocated array variable. So that basically means it will only be used when this function is being called. So when this function is not being called, we're not going to be using that array variable. So that basically means we'll be saving some memory space for that. So to do that, let's go ahead and use our data type, which is CAN bus. Okay, so we pass our pointer symbol. Then we're going to basically now create the array variable, which is name of our choosing. So I'm going to say my array is equal to new, because now this is a dynamically allocated array. So it basically will be used every time we access this function. Then we can call our data type again, CAN bus. Then here we need to now pass the size of the array. Now, good news for us here is that the function that we created earlier in the tutorial is already accepting the size of the array that we basically got from here. Okay, so we can then just pass the variable size into here. Right, so now to complete our function, we're just going to copy my array variable and we're going to pass it here so that the function can be satisfied. Now the next thing we need to do is to basically take all these variables and assign them or add them to this array variable, which is a dynamically allocated array that is part of this CAN bus data type that we actually declare as a struct here. Okay, so to make things easier here, we're basically going to cut all these line of code. We don't need this sum statement here anymore. I'm just going to comment it out, or I can remove it all together. we don't need these integers type anymore associated with these variables here, because we already defined them in the struct here. So what we're going to do is very simple. We already computing our data here. We're not going to change that because we're getting a different array variable coming from this main function here. Okay, so what we're going to do is basically just to take this data and add it to this struct variable here. So we're basically going to call my array variable. Okay, so we're gonna call my array variable, and we're going to pass a variable I, which is going to loop through the size of the array. And then since we are now calling the my array, which is a dynamically allocated array that is part of the CAN bus struct, now we've got access to all the members of that struct. So now we can just see here what's the first variable that we're computing here. That was the volt. So we can basically just access the volt. So we can just do the same for all of them. I'm just going to copy and paste. Right, now it seems like our function is almost completed, or rather completed. And it's also important to note that the variable sizes here that we are actually using here as the size of this array, it does not actually matter. We can actually even hard code this to any value. We can, assuming that the value that we're going to hard code in the array is able to hold all the variable that we're going to add into this array. Into this array. Right now we know that we want to add 4 variable into this array, so which means the array size must be at least of size 4 that can hold 4 variable. So as by passing the variable sizes that we know got the value of 10 here, okay, as per our calculation here, then we know that we've got more than enough room for our array to hold all of these 4 variables, and there will be even space left. Okay, now, and again, this is a dynamically allocated array, so there is no worries. We're not going to be wasting any space. As soon as we're done with this function, we can actually delete this array to save the space. So let me go ahead and clear this line of code since we don't need it anymore. Now let's come back to the main function here and see what we are still lagging here, what we need to fix here. So we've got one error here. A value of type CAN bus cannot be used to initialize an entity, right? So now we can clearly see that this function here, decode CAN data, right? This function is no longer of type integer. It's no longer returning an integer. So this statement here is wrong because our function now is of type array pointer function. Okay, so what we have to do now is to basically change our story here. Right, so now we know that this function here is actually returning an entire array of size 4, which got 4 variable in it. Right, so what we have to do, since we now know that this function decode CAN data is now able to return an entire array that we know have got a size of 4. Okay, so we have to now change this variable here so that it can also accept the array that this function is returning. So now the same way we've done here to basically declare a dynamically allocated array, we're going to basically do the same. So I'm going to copy this line of code and basically paste it here, just like that. So now you realize that the error will be gone, except that I have to remove the double equal sign. Right, so just to avoid clashes here, because this array and this array, they're basically the same but not the same, right? So this one is used to basically store the data and then return them. Now this one is used to basically cache the data. Okay, so just to make sure that they are slightly different, you can just put an S here, my arrays, then you know that this is a new array variable you've created. So now you've got a problem here with the return that is complaining, obviously, because you don't have that anymore. So here basically is where you're going to process all your data. So you can call cout to print the data out, which I just remove that line of code. I'm going to bring it back. So what I'm going to do here is to basically verify that I'm getting the correct data. So I'm going to change the return by calling my arrays. Okay, so I'm going to call my arrays there. Okay, then I'm going to place basically a placeholder of 0, because I know from this function here that I've got only 4 data stores here. So placeholder 0 will be holding the vault. Okay, so I'm just going to put 0 there. Then I have to pass a variable, a parameter for the vault. Okay, now I'm going to put vault there. Now remember, these variables, they are accessible because they are part of the struct, and I've declared or created this array by using the same data type of the same struct, so I can still access the same variables. Now if I print out this statement here, I should be able to get the same value that is being returned from this array. Now remember, I'm using a different array here, so I've got my arrays and here is my array, just to ensure that what I'm printing here is not this value here, but it's basically what is being returned by this line of code here. Okay, so you just have to make sure of that. So let me rather change these and say can bus arrays. Okay, can bus array. Then I have to change this one as well, make it can bus array. Okay, then here I will just change it to make it voltage. Okay, then let me print another line of code. Okay, so we'll print another line of code here, and we're going to change this to engine temperature. Okay, then we know that what's the engine temperature is on placeholder number 1. Okay, then here we can basically just access the engine temp variable. Okay, now here I want to switch on the fan when the engine temperature goes above 50. So what I can do is to basically just copy this whole thing. Since I haven't created a variable to hold it, I can just copy this whole thing and pass this here, and make sure you just wrap it between bracket so that everything is properly harmonized. Okay, so now let's go ahead and give this a run, and hopefully everything is going to run smooth if there is no issue. So let's save it, and then we give it a run. Let's go ahead and run this line of code and see what we're going to get here on the output window. So let's just bring this window up a bit. Okay, so I'm getting voltage is 49, engine temperature is 55, and turn on the radiator, right? So this is basically the code is working as we've actually coded it. So this is it, guys, for this tutorial. We've been able to demonstrate an easier way to pass an array as a function parameter and process it, and then be able to return the array after processing it. Now remember, this function here can actually be part of a library, so you basically be working with your data type definition here, and then calling your function, and then being able to handle them from your main function here. So this is actually working, and you can add another if statement here to do something when your your brake fluid oil level goes below a certain point. You can also print that value if you want to. Now you know your brake fluid here is on placeholder number 3, so you just have to change that to number 3, and then access your brake fluid variable here. So then you just need to also give a name there, brake fluid. Now if we save it one more time and give it another run, we should be able to also print the brake fluid. There we go, brake fluid is 69, and turn on the radiator. So the code is working perfectly as we wanted it to work. Thank you guys for watching. If you found it useful and you've learned something out of it, don't forget to thumbs up and subscribe to CMTEQ channel. Until next time, cheers.